Oh, is it gonna be a formal introduction or?
Yeah, you can do like as you're comfortable.
Oh, all right. So, hi, and informative. Ryan would be speaking first, Jason would be speaking second, Brian would be speaking third, and Jason would also be the reply. Good luck, everyone. Hopefully, it's gonna be a fun debate.
Thank you, Team Affirmative from Negative.
Hi, Adin will speaking first. Razik will speaking first. Yeah. Second, Ilham. Third, Albert. Reply me. Good luck for debate.
Okay, so confirming the reply will be Razik, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for the introduction. Hello, my name is Justin. I'm gonna be the chair for the round under the motion of that African countries should grant separatist groups regional government status. Welcome to round 5 of IVED 2025. As usual, maximum speaking time is 8 minutes and 20 seconds. I'm gonna be sharing the timer, but also like just in case, feel free to use your own timer as well to track your own speech. Before we start, mention your preferred gender pronouns, if any. Remember, no POI in nostrils format. And let's have a fun and equitable round of debating. Without further ado, we can start the debate, calling upon first affirmative.
Hi, I'm audible.
Yep.
Right, setting up my timer. Disclaimer, just for debating purposes, not my personal opinion. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two pieces of setup. First, what does it mean to give separatist group regional government status? It means that African countries like Somalia and Nigeria should grant separatist group, like respectively Somaliland and Biafra regional government status, which constitutes A, the right to self-determination. For example, they are exempt from the national law and are allowed to make their own religious, cultural, or ethic law. Second, they are given some degree, a huge degree of autonomy. For example, to make government bureaucracy by themselves, their own method to choose their leader can be appointed via election, monarchy, or even caliphate, whatever they want. C, they are allowed to have symbol and their new identity. We're going to remove the bloody historical experience and let them start. Yeah. Sorry. We're going to completely remove the bloody historical experience, start normalization of relation by stopping the war, settling down and negotiate even normalize tension for future benefits such as having trade. We're also going to do that on the table. Second setup, I think OP cannot pick the stance of giving full independence, right? I think they have to defend the status quo approach, which is crackdown through violence. Why is giving full independence not shouldn't be their stance? The first reason is that the likelihood is remote because of the ongoing hatred. The likely consensus a shift is either B, one ceasefire, with the likely scenario is that in the near future you're going to continue the war, or B, special autonomy. We think it's a kind of the sweet spot in the balance, right? Not totally independent, but still have some ties. Even when the independence is a shift, I think even if they do give full independence, I think it will also bad as well in practice because it will leave potential for mismanagement for the new country. This is likely for two reasons. First, the leaders are going to be inexperienced in managing nation because most likely they are the ones that the warlords that only focused on winning the war the whole time, or the fact that there will likely be lack of check and balance mechanism, but creating potential for rampant corruption and oppression. So for these two reasons, I think it shouldn't be what opposition defend due to its impractical nature and its low likelihood. Therefore, they should defend the status quo approach, which is crackdown through violence. I'm going to bring one big case. Why the only way you can reach reconciliation and stopping the conflict is for you to grant these separatist groups and region a regional government status. The thesis of this argument is to say that the separatist group and that separatist region has grown too deep of a historical and ongoing tension or hatred with the national government. Hence, the only way to stop the violence is to grant them regional status. I think the problem that is the most urgent is that there is this ongoing war between separatist movement and the central government. This looks like small skirmishes between militant groups in deserts to full-blown war and siege in big cities, especially like in the Sahel region, for example, right? War, its continuation is bad. War is bad currently as it's ongoing. Its continuation is bad, And hence, stopping war is time sensitive under 4 reasons. First is that regional instability. War is something that spreads and spill over, especially in regions that is volatile. Look at the war in Sahel region, which was isolated in some parts of Burkina Faso, now spreads to Mali and the region. Second, it also creates breeding ground for terrorism. For example, families of the dead, people who lose purpose, people who fears the government now, makes for more buy-in for the campaigns from radical groups that offer peace and solace in the form of religion that is heaven. Third, it's also a breeding ground for criminal and syndicate activity. This looks like new warlords, new terrorist groups are funding their operation through means like drug production and sales, blood diamond mining, or organ harvesting. But lastly, it's also bad because it sows the seed for future conflict, creating new generational trauma, creating new sects and division between the already divided group. With that case, I think stopping war is time sensitive, and we think ceasefire is the only way to do that. Why is other alternative not enough? I'm going to engage to both scenario. Let's say op wants to give like trying to coexistence and military. Why are they not enough? Firstly, why is coexistence under big government unlikely to be achieved without you giving this regional status, right? Just continuing as it stands with negotiating ceasefire, but you're still under us without enough degree of autonomy. Because I think without the autonomy, it's not going to work because firstly, the people in that region and the separatist movement feels like the government is there is a huge distrust within the government, right? For example, there are ongoing injustices because the government are majoritarian. For example, like in Sudan, it's dominated by the majority, and it oppress the people of South Sudan. I think there is military oppression, modern slavery, and extraction prior to the separatist movement taking arms. So I think they will not trust that anyway. But second, I think crackdown by military, like through violence, is also not likely to be successful and achieve the goal of taming down the separatist movement and making them back down enough so that they want to rejoin the government or to whatever end that opposition wants. Why? Because firstly, African military, especially in these nations that are facing the separatist movement, are weak. They are under-trained, they are under-equipped, and it's hard for them to get support from like regional or global powerhouses, right? For example, it's a political suicide for even Russia and China to give them weapon and training, as well as for Western nation. They are also torn down by years of civil war, years of corruption within the military and the government, means that this military is very weak and unorganized in comparison to more modern military, right? The problem is these separatist guerrillas are hard to crack down. They like the majority of guerrilla groups and terrorist movement, they are especially hard to crack down because one, they have a decentralized chain of command, right? Filled with better hardened jihadists that have a flexible and can do lone wolf approaches. So even if you do things like decapitation or other methods, it simply cannot get rid of them. They also have a strong network of spies, informants that hides in the plain sight within civilian groups. So indiscriminate attacks will likely backlash to you. They also have the ability to fund themselves through criminal activity, like the things that I have listed above. So you have this weak African military trying to go against separatist guerrilla. We think that what is likely to happen is the current stalemate, right? They are having skirmishes in a lot of places. They are dropping bombs here and there, but no one is backing down. And I think peace negotiation is not on the table, right? Therefore, the only way we say is to give them the regional government status. It's the bargaining chip for a ceasefire, right? To appease their demand for self-determination, because it's a trauma response that when they do not have the independent degree of autonomy, when they do not have control over themselves, the government abuses it. So I think the bargaining chip that we need to ask for ceasefire, for further, rebuilding of connection and reconciliation is to give them what they want. We think that this is the only way, given other alternatives such as violent crackdown or like trying to negotiate, like just come under us without any privilege is not going to work. What is the impact? First, you're going to save a lot of resource. We think war is expensive, given African nations have a lot of other things that needs aid, needs government intervention, needs to rebuild their agriculture. We think it's a lot of money funneled through the right things. But second, it's stopping the war is very important. Stopping the war means more stability, means stopping the shed of blood, and I think a lot of other benefit. Yeah, stopping the ongoing problems that I've talked about. For all these reasons, propose.
Thank you. Let's continue with first negative.
I am audible and visible.
Yeah.
Okay. I will start my speech. Oh yeah, trigger warning. This is just for debating purpose only. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Imagine that you are a minority in 11, wake up in the separatist part of Tigray in Ethiopia. This is what government wants to protect. This is what governments want to bring. Negative will win this debate by proving to you two things, judges. First, why the separatist group should not be granted the right to governing a sovereign territory within the country. But secondly, then, if we grant the separatist group this proposed territory, it will be bad for the status quo, the regional territory. Because notice, judges, this is a that X motion, not as X motion, means that the benefit is have to be the most approximate around the status quo, not just for the African country per se. Our counterfactual is very simple. We don't want African country to grant the separatist group a regional government status, but instead we want them to change and fix structural problem with the government in the very first place. Our counterfactual not always be violence, because in our side of the house is also can advocating and whatsoever. I will explain this later, but I will explain first why by giving the right and the sovereign status, this will be bad at the very first place. Other rebuttals will be integrated in my case. I have two things here. First, why the separatist group should not be granted the right to governing a sovereign regional territory status. But secondly, then, why if we give them, this will hampering the progressivity that already happened in the status quo. The premise of first argument is very simple. This is a form of irrationality, anger that happened in the status quo right now, and this have to be catered by the strong governing body outside this separatist movement that cater the interest all of this separatist movement. Because first, how actually the separatist group emerged and why the separatist group want to separate themselves from the very first place, that what Karian already said. We will say because two reasons. First, they're not in line or don't really like the current government in their country right now. But secondly, then they have different perspective to actually run the country with other African nations. But secondly, then, but let's back to the basics. What makes a country is a country, and what makes a government is a government. There are three things. First, regional government. Second, an active citizen. But thirdly, international recognition since the very get-go. I know that this is not about the sovereign nation, but I think this is still important because you will have the power to autonomy those kind of religion, and you have to begin your position not only to those kind of terrorist group, but also other nations in the status quo. Let's talk about this later. Notice that this is not debating in the vacuum. There are already a country in Africa that those countries already have a rich history and rich culture that compact their nations is the very get-go. This is why if they will say that this is historically and principally justified because there's segregation like from colonizer, like British, for example. This is why this is true. This is principally incorrect because historically and principally speaking, that are true, and the good governing body in Africa right now has been accepted by the nation and the world as a whole with the democracy, for example, and whatsoever. So I think the idea of granting them the right to sovereign their land is unjustifiable because a very simple premise that I want to prove in this debate. This is a form of the rationalization that U.S. government give to the separatist movement. This validates their unhealthy emotion that they push towards them. What is this bad? Because first, naturally, humans are very emotional creatures. This is why we have emotion. We are separate from other mammals, for example, judges. means there are likelihood that they will use their emotion first and not likely to be cooperative towards the government. Because there are different tribes and there's different perspective and religion, for example. Because notice, judges, like exactly Rian said, the separatist group are based on the religious and racial issues that pose it on three different things. First, you cannot choose it since you are birth, but secondly, then you cannot change it when you are not in the middle of territory that you like, for example. But third, that you internalize this kind of hatred is the very gut-goal. So I think the idea of strong central government that governing this body with the identity, for example, like cultural identity, the unified identity is much better than validate their emotion to this kind of separatist movement. And this hatred are internalized when you are birthed. So this through the likelihood that they will use this kind of hatred to the minority in the region. Jose cannot tackle this by saying that, we don't have epistemic access to do it. Because I think they also can have the epistemic access to think about it. So we, based on the likelihood, that I give you the likelihood why this will be bad, this is the very gut call. But secondly then, let's engage to the base case scenario in the opposite in the affirmative sense. What if they can think rationally and this is give bargaining position to the nation as a whole? By giving them this regional government, this will be more bad because this will validate their ego that they're internalizing is bad because, with this kind of narasi perjuangan, for example, that will increase their likelihood to join the movement and the country, for example. So the conclusion of this premise is very simple. This is unjustified to the sovereignty and the struggle of the founding fathers in the status quo, and we think comparatively moderate government, democratic government with centralized power will be better comparatively to their own separatist and identified base movement. This is worse because at least with the democratic government that we choose, first, everyone can vote, but secondly, then it's easier to make counterbalance in the status quo. But second contribution then, even if yes, this is a form of government responsibility that yes, this war is happening because they are not likely, being oppressed by the majoritarian government since the very get-go. I will say that this is principally unjustified for this African country to do it. Why? Because exactly, let's recontextualize them. What's an inherent characterization of post-colonial, especially in Africa? I think I agree with what Rian said, that there are still gaps in government infrastructure, government ability to think, government ability to proceed, and government ability to make a good democracy. So this is the focus that government should take. This is not by granting their individual rights, for example, because this is the form of responsibility that government should use and government should bring to them, because this is what they, because this is what they fault and they have to solve their fault, for example. By granting this regional government status, this is bad because first, all their benefits are contingent to how this regional government can give also a betterment for its people, for example. But secondly, then, to this regional government can actually make a bargaining position to this majoritarian democratic country in Africa. We will say that yes, this is a progress in the status quo right now. Many African countries, like industrialization and democratization in Ghana, for example, or there are already governing body like Conference Asia Africa or other things that happen in the African country right now. Or even there are incentives from China and Russia, for example, like BRICS and etc., that willingly to help this emerging African nation. Then this is bad and principally unjustified to validate the separatist movement from itself. This means that this is good form of government accountability, because this is exactly the problem that government brings, and government should fix those kind of problems since the very first place. But I will explain the second contextualization here, the second argument shortly. Why by granting their right, this will hamper the progressivity and progress within the status quo. I agree that the contextualization that they gave about bargaining position is there, but I think the idea of it, there are many likelihood that there's willingness to them to actually learn, for example, to actually internalize those kind of things to this country, for example. Because here, judges, even if they're separatists, they know that their family, for example, is protecting this nation, is fought for this nation, is die for this nation, sorry. This is meanings that they have the tendency is to actually cooperate with the government. But the problem that you have to fix is between this majoritarian government with this local government. This is why we think that if we separate them, this will will increase the likelihood of harm that will be proceeded by opposition affirmative. Thank you.
Thank you. Continue with second F.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Cool. I think it should be obvious to the opposition side that when you are making a counter proposal, then this counter proposal must be mutually exclusive. When you are arguing for reform, internal reform, and all of that, I think it would still be achieved on our side. And as a matter of fact, ultimately, you can see that it is already progressing. Therefore, it is already existing anyway symmetrically. What you want to achieve is that a full government, central government control, which does not provide the likelihood on how, which considering this is a policy motion and you are making a counter proposal, ultimately it is your burden to prove it as well. And I'm going to argue preemptively why it is not going to be achieved. But before that, one crucial point of clarification. Why do separatist movement exist? I think it exists, especially in African context, based on two possible reasons. One, there is a historic and or ongoing political oppression that are happening. That is to say that the state is using their own tools to create violence to these minorities to the point that they feel like the only way for them is to separate from this country. And secondly, is that because of the economic mismanagement of the resources that exist inside those regions in and of itself, to the extent that they believe that they are able to control it better. Insofar as we manage to prove why those 2 points will be better off if you grant them special autonomy, we should win this debate. Moving on to the case. Firstly, on the conflict resolution. You want government, central government to have full control. This can only be translated in 2 ways. Firstly, you have to defeat them in war. This is going to be non-preferable, exactly because violence would most likely be continuing. This is likely to happen because one, exactly when this separatist movement have existed for so long, they are most likely able to control have a stronghold in and of itself, which the state are unable to fully control. This means that there is the specific area that inside of those region that they are able to stockpile their foods, their supplies, their guns, and whatnot. And exactly because they exist for so long, especially when you're talking about Somaliland or Biafra or all of that, you are most likely going to have the legitimacy in the eyes of the people in and of itself. Therefore, it is strictly impossible for the government to exert control in those regions effectively, right? If you want to have full government control. Secondly, the violence will continue insofar as you will not address the historical and ongoing political oppression that is going to happen. It is a simple trauma response for the oppression that are happening. Exactly when you are oppressing people in the past, they are most likely going to rebel. Thirdly, what do they want exactly? They want recognition, and this is one of the main points that the government, that the opposition team are arguing against. Right? They want that this terrorist group, for example, will not get the recognition in and of itself because it would inflate their ego and whatnot. Well, obviously, the inflation of ego would still exist on both sides. What will happen on their side is that they would fight more for those recognition. They would do more violence so that these regions, those movements will gain the recognition it deserves, will gain the seriousness in and of itself. So the weighing is simple. We would rather inflate their egos a bit if it meant saving our people from suicide bombers, for example, which are going to be harmful in long run. And exactly because of this, the defeating of war is ultimately going to be unpreferable as it continues the violence in and of itself. Therefore, the only suitable way for you is to reach the negotiation path by using the bargaining chip that is the autonomy in and of itself. This is strictly going to be better. on a principle level, there is going to be historical oppression, which is the main reason why all of this separatist shit happened in the first place. Therefore, on a principle basis, the state have the responsibility to correct those wrongs in the past. And exactly the only way, because you are especially committing atrocities in this region, you have to provide special recognition for their autonomy in order for you to correct the past mistakes. But on the practical side, you have to learn how to engage with this separatist movement in and of itself, right? Exactly when they are not getting the recognition and basically committing atrocities back, committing terrorist attacks back, people would start to turn against you as the government, blame you for not negotiating, for actively causing the mass pain, exactly because you are unable to negotiate in and of itself. And this, in turn, would lead into people more likely to turn into extremism in the first place, which is going to create more problems for the government. And the terrorist goal of creating instabilities within the nation in and of itself will be achieved. The comparative, insofar as you are able to negotiate, which are most likely going to be achieved insofar as most likely these people would know that in the long run, with their limited resources and all of that, they cannot possibly win this conflict insofar as it dragged on for a long time. They are rational enough to enter negotiation to ensure that at least their future, their value will be preserved in the world, even though they have to settle for autonomy in and of itself, right? Therefore, you are handling it before it gets much worse and create much more problem in the long run in terms of the violence. Therefore, on the conflict resolution, we managed to achieve the win-win solution insofar as the past atrocities are recognized by giving the autonomy and stopping the conflict in and of itself. Secondly, regarding the management of the resources, exactly because this past mismanagement happened because of the central government control, which are only resulting in mismanagement, like the area area where the resources is coming from becoming not getting developed as much as they should be. It shows the failure of the central government control in and of itself. You need more additional ideas, more traditional values that coming from this region, so that this region would be prioritized exactly because they are the one who is providing it. This is only principally correct because they are the source of the income in itself, but also practically true because ultimately, insofar as the state wanted the resources to existing in this local separatist area, the local area also can provide the management, provides the control of the region in and of itself, where the state are able to extract the resources conducively. How should you weigh this characterization? Well, ultimately, in the status quo, insofar as you are going to continue the conflict, you are going to hamper the state's ability to access those resources. But also at the same time, you are going to hamper the separatist area movement in and of itself to manage on their own. By only stopping this conflict, by only giving them the autonomy, you reach the sweet middle ground insofar as they are able to extract the resources while prioritizing the local area that has been abandoned for too long.
Thank you. Second next.
Cek, ada nggak Kak?
Ya.
Oke, clear ya. Dulu bentar. Yep. Hello, my name is Ilham. Entrepreneur PR him. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The prerequisite of the case given by proposition is to think: A, if they can prove to us why all those
the separatist movement have the intention of the cooperation, but second, they have the capacity to control the area at the very begin with. I think there is no any explanation why it can be so, because we say those one who will never have the intention of cooperation, since at the very beginning they had the government also, and we say this condition are no longer likely because all the hatred that are actually being penetrated for so long time. But second of all, it's true, like Rian said, oh, they are no longer the one who are experienced to control the government, for example, or to govern the area, for example, because they're just a warlord. Means that the time when they have the capacity to control and have a huge responsibility of the government or to some certain area, for example, it will give more worse condition for the all the society within the condition. I will prove you later why the condition is worse inside of the government there. But second of all, I think they say, oh, there is no likelihood for the government to win the war compared to combat what the separatists, for example. I think a mismatch characterization, because we say the separatists in Africa is not the one who's strong like Taliban or ISIS, for example. They're also the one come from the poor area. They have limited amount of resources, for example. This is why they conducted a war guerrilla, not a direct war compared what happened in Middle East, for example. What does it mean? It means that the time when you always press them with more power, for example, even with untrained soldier, for example, but as long as it can prolonging, for example, because the world we're talking about how much resources that you have. We see the separatists have limited amount of resources. This is why they cannot sustain the progressivity of the war at the end of the day. We see the likelihood of war is still likely because there is not any another support for the country to funding the separatists, for example, compared to the government, they will always get the funding from the international aid or embodiment, which is the likelihood is still likely. My another response should be integrated on my speech, but I'm going to talk to you two things. I will talk to you why the capacity of those separatists are less likely to control the area, but second of all, why then at the end of the day, what happened in government ban, we just escalated the war and it led into worse condition to African nation. Let's see the first one. Why green regional government to the separatists? Context, I think what a regional government would look like. I agree with Kak Rian by saying, oh, there will be huge authority, capacity to choose their leader, for example, the system of the area, for example, and control the government, even putting some certain military approach and some. But how the characteristic of the separatists itself? I think most of them are the one who come from identity group that are fight for their identity and clash with other tribe, for example, because there is an historical conflict there, and they're not the one who are educated enough because they're mostly experienced to be a warlord access. But why then the question is then become why then those two contexts will lead into a bad grant to the regional government authority? Two reasons. First, since they don't have any experience to govern at all, means that they're less likely they have enough capacity to control all the resources or all the society. This is bad because you're talking about Africa, the one who have any scarcity in food, for example, water resistant. They're still away from economical development, or even there is any class. It's tribe, for example. Then when those people who don't have enough capacity at all to control all those problems that exist, the way that are likely is the one that come from, for example, identity group will be the one who are prioritizing, for example. Makes it there will be more probability of the discrimination we have access, or the one who are suffer were more likely because there is no lack of capacity of controlling and to govern those places. But second, I think it will also escalate the probability of conflict. Why is that so? I mean, I think granted the regional government are the way you giving the signal to the other terrorists or other separatists and validate their demand that is Islam totally okay, and government will do the same if I demand for the authority for some certain area, for example. What does it mean? It means that there will be more group of separatists demand the same things, means that there is probability in the future those African countries are losing all their authority for their nation, for example, because every area demanding the same right. There are also, this is problematic because we say those in those one area not only come from one separatist that access, there is likelihood of two or more separatists that access. What does it mean? It means that there is a probability for them to fight for the right to control or govern those area. We say those places will be something like a new battleground, for example, for them. But why then those two harm are quite significant? Two reasons. We say there will be way more people are likely to die because before when those separatists fight for the nation army, for example, they need to fight the country who have more power, and because they feel that, oh, I don't have enough power, this is why I do a guerrilla, for example, to sustain my resources. But now they just face to face with the same separatists, with might be they have also the same resources, for example, so they feel that, oh, direct approach of war is something they're likely to do, and I have chance to win, for example. We make those area to be a battleground, the likely of civilian to die for this shot and something similar along the line. We see the likelihood of the war are escalated instead of government bans. But second, I think since there is any huge control given to separatists, means that those areas are out of control from the central authority because they cannot intervene. Every single incentive of intervention given by central authority of the central nation, for example, it lead to the signal of war from the separatists, for example. It leads to two things. There will be less scrutiny talking about discrimination or access to be given by another part of the identity group, for example, or how the international embodiment will opt in, for example. It will be very hard for them to pursue to the separatists, for example. It's easier for you to ask and negotiate with the central authority of the country, for example, because there will be more scrutiny from international embodiment. I think the way of the benefit will be better inside of the opposition bans. But what is the comparative? I think what happened in opposition is something more simple. We're still opposing the separatists, either in soft approach, such as diplomacy, accommodation of right to accommodation, more access, for example, or we are still conducting hard approach, giving more some post military in some part of there are likely to be any attack by the separatists. We say something are still likely. But what is the likelihood we can win this condition, or why it can give more benefit toward more people at the end of the day? We say the separative exists because there is unsatisfied with the government treatment, for example. We say country in Africa start to being progressive. It show up the average economic growth 4.3%, for example. It's quite big for these countries like what happened in Africa, where it's underdeveloped. Most and more like because there is more access to the given, for example, by some sort of society. But second, I think there is any central supervised of right given by the international embodiment, for example. It means that there is any facilitate for the society or citizen to report if there is any discrimination conducting by the nation, for example. Means that there will be more scrutiny that access. We say something that are likely to be progressive in the future and creating more better satisfaction to the separatists in order for them to join and reunite with the African nation, for example. We admit the trade-off is we are not directly any progress for any directly solve the problem, but it might take the longer time, for example. But we say it's way better compared to government bans because you're losing all the control, for example, probability of more discrimination during the area because they're no longer a part of identity group, or the way you're losing the miscontrol of area, for example, make more people suffer and something similar along those lines. We can protect more people within the area, we can give you more sustainability of the future compared what happened with Gulf. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you. Third F.
Hi, just a second, I'm both audible and visible.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Maybe it's not about starting the war because your founding father told you to do so. Maybe because we just need to save more heartwarming smiles so that we can make the war become something that is lifeable. I want to talk about two things. Number one, counterfactual. Second, likelihood to stability. So first of all, I think I want to clarify their counterfactual but fix the structural problems within the government will not work with your responses. And by the end of these responses, you are going to notice that separatists do have the incentive to cooperate as what Ilham considered. Number one, because continuous war. So I think there is a reasons why separatists being separatists, exactly like what Op said, which they have different perspective. They have different culture value. But the difference is most of the African states mess up by being discriminative and anti-tolerant toward the differences. That is happening because of external interventions such as from France, and it's going on historically such as Somaliland, were separated into small fractions because some of them did not trust local government and try to trust the colonizer. So again, oppression is the key separatism appear. We try to minimize them as much as we can by giving them regional government status. Second, again, everyone has their own ego, which is to say, like what Ob said, people want to protect the willingness of the founding father. But however, in separatism, the definition of that founding father might be twisted. In Indonesia, PKI might think someone like Musso was the hero, but Indonesian government might claim Suharto as a hero. So again, their own characterizations make the resolution become harder to achieve because we have our own definition of value. And unless Ob can claim that it is possible to unify that value outside of doing war, then we probably say conflict would still be going on in their side. Thirdly, I think I'll flip this by proving that people that were indoctrinated by their extreme obligation to founding fathers like what Razik said are the vulnerable actor here because they were manipulated by politicians who control media, thinking that whenever you kill terrorists and separatists, you're noble, you're marvelous. I'm so disappointed the fact that Razik said the family from African civilians would feel safe, would feel protected, without considering that separatists and terrorists also have their own family, also have the people that they love. Both of them are humans. What we can do is at least being morally correct and emphasize to save everyone without discriminating them. By the end of this response, we'll notice the lack of clarity from opposition's resolutions because they claim that, oh, we can minimize the conflict in the earliest part, but later on they claim it's fine to defend our family against the separatism. So it's either the solution to fix structural problems such as poverty that apparently one of the contributor why someone became a separatist or terrorist will not work because the resources are invested on military sector. But secondly, they must agree to some extent war would happen. The question is, who will win the war, how likely it is, and we already knew whoever won it, everyone is dying, and that is an enough justification to stop the conflict. The second thing that our response is of claim on people would be even more aggressive when we give regional governments status to separatists and terrorists. One, I do not know how likely it is. Given up, consider there are stress, tension between people to continue the war again and again because of traumatic experiences from war, and the massive cultural damage they have experienced up until now means the likelihood to continue is less likely, but it will be elevated if the separatists did not get what they want, did not get a proper treatment from the local government, so it does not change anything on oppositions though. But second of all, maybe we can concede to some extent both the government is corrupt, everyone is bad, and it is not our burden to change the transparency in all African states, but at least the corrupt government would have no ability to abuse their power in our side of the house. Because if you're integrating in a central government, there's going to be a supervision, not only from central government, but from other provinces as well. But the doctrines that upset is unlikely to be respected by people anymore because we got what we want, which is our own area. That means the power of the corrupt politicians that doctrinize the people on the ground from separatism and terrorism group is going to be weaker in quality. And this possibly impact the society in two ways. Number one, right now we might focus on the negotiation and building our own government and trying to normalize the group relation to establish that trade agreement and etc. And I think this is going to be our main priority in the future. Because if we can stop the war properly, at least there is a degree of skepticism rising from the separatists if they, or like the leaders, do not want to accept the proposal, which means maybe bloody conflict in our very worst case is irreversible, but you do not make it a conflict between the civilians and separatists, but you create the internal separation between that separatism because you as a central government show the willingness to collaborate, which in quantity, the numbers of victims would be less and the collateral damage would not be massive. But second of all, it also shaped the future political climate, which is to say, the orientation right now is going to be everyone who wants to build more separatism is unlikely to be trusted in their side because we as central government already shows our commitment to peace. That makes the violence groups and individual lose his power even further because they can be outcasted when they continuously playing with people's life. This is where you must fight for humanity, and this is only exclusive in propositions. Second, on likelihood of stability. Ilham said African country is powerful. There are creative ways to win the war. Three responses. One, this is symmetric. In fact, both are creative. Terrorists and separatists often hide in settlement to ensure that whenever the state did bombing, like what Israel did to Hamas, then they can vilify the states and gain even more donation. So therefore, both sides are quite creative. The difference is state must obey on international humanitarian law, so they cannot completely dismantle terrorists though. The fact that Israel bombed settlements or hospitals still present up until now, it just shows how hard it is to combat terrorism and separatism if they are going in ongoing conflict. And I think this conflict has happened even for 30 years. So maybe based on resources, African states are powerful if you ignore Ryan case on other priorities in Africa, but they have little to no flexibility. They cannot use things such as chemical bombs that often separatists or terrorists use to solve the conflict as soon as possible. That means the likelihood the war is going to be toe-to-toe is likely to be higher, and that's the moment when you elevate the cultural damage in oppositions. But second response, I think you need to notice the time frame. You have done the war for probably like almost 5 until 30 years, such as Boko Haram conflicting against like Nigeria government. You are tired. Everyone is dying. The likelihood to reconcile happening in our side. To this, Ilham said, but we are still doing negotiation. Like, of course, the demand between separatists is always clear. Hamas always want independency or spatial autonomy. They do not want to submit against central government, in which they never got that from Israel, right? So that means like, if you want to continue the conflict, then feel free to do so. But of course, it's going to be a massive cultural damage, and it's going to be hard to achieve any consensus from negotiation given by Ilham solutions, because the end output is going to be give us one state or give us spatial autonomy. That's when we gave them, and we want to end the war as soon as possible. The conclusion to all of this is that you need to consider the timeline. This is not the time when we need to negotiate anymore. This is a time when we need to achieve resolution as soon as possible. The second thing that I want to respond, Ilham said, you have no likelihood of stability because separatists are not used to govern the country. One, what was this claim? Guys, the fact that they can be separatists, the fact that they can garner much more power, it shows that they are probably going to be led by competent politicians. And I think it just shows that they can probably govern states to some extent, and they can also influence people as well in either side of the house. But second of all, if they cannot govern state, then maybe our proposal works better in this circumstance, because if they are submitting, or at least if they are cooperating against the central government, then definitely central government can help them by establishing trade agreements so that everyone will not go to war anymore. Everyone can find jobs. Everyone can start living a normal life in which ordinary individuals did in the first place. Therefore, all of this concludes that at least in our side, we prove that somehow separatism was not that irrational. They are quite competent, and there was a reasons why they become rival against the central government for competing against power. So they are pretty competent to make a whole state by themselves. That means all of this concludes that opposition's case forgot about the urgency. We explained the timeline. This is not a time for us to sitting on the table drinking some tea. This is a time for us to react clearly about what we should do and save more people's life.
Thank you. Third neck.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, just a few disclaimers since I'm sick, so like if I sniff or cough in the middle of speech, please bear with that. And secondly, since this is recorded, I hope it's not, please do not take it out of context, yeah? I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judges, Africa has gone through a bloody and brutal history war of being colonized by European powers like the UK, France, and Belgium. And all of this is worsened when Europeans colonizer thinks it's a great idea to draw borders during the scramble for Africa with little regards for ethnic, linguistic, or cultural division. It results into 3 specific contexts that we debate upon. Firstly, multiple ethnics being forced into a single state, which is why you see countries like Nigeria, Sudan, and Congo have diverse ethnic groups with competing interests that exist in the spectrum that often leads into endless conflicts and tension. Secondly, ethnic groups being split across multiple countries like Somali population spread across Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, and when they are supposed to be uniting in one area. Most and foremost, most of these separatist groups are identity-based and majoritarian because they are often centered around ethnic issue, and the one who have most population in that particular area are able to dominate more because they have more followers, and this is based on that specific groups that dominate the region, right? For example, in Somaliland, it is being dominated by Isaac clan, and in Biafra, it is led by Igbo people. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, and which is what the context I told you. But what the context doesn't told you is that they are not the only groups that exist in the spectrum, but there's also coexisting in a spectrum with other minorities. Obviously, these are the separatist groups that are going to lead the conflicts. I corrected proposition characterization on this, right? Because there are also people afraid of dominated groups in that area that often discriminated them, for example, and the government become the only people that they can trust, for example, because it is the only objective one, even if they are not doing their great job, for example, right? Meaning, when these separatist groups are granted the wish to become a regional government, even if they are not minority and whatsoever, it's not important anymore because they will become the majority either way on their side. So the reason they want to seek autonomy and also independence is oftentimes result from the needs of superiority, because the way that these movements are filled by so much, this movement are filled by so much anger, hatred inside of that movement itself, which is why they internalize so much hatred, which is why they never want to stop the war, for example, because they have so much anger and irrational thoughts inside of that movement itself that often projected into other ethnic groups, that they blame the fall of their current movement into other groups, for example. Which is why the reason why they are not the most suitable actors, because hatred is not the interest for central government, right? It's not the metric of why a government will be good, but it's to other ethnic groups, for example. Because anger, hatred is valid because it is trauma response, sure, but it also means that you will project that into governing the specific region. You are going to internalize that hatred when governing the specific region, right? And this is the confusing part of the debate, guys, because proposition said that, oh, on our side, still, there's, they pointed out that separatist movement still exists on our side, and that's bad because there's still going to be violence anyway. They will never want to come into peace, for example. But they also said that, oh, on their side, suddenly when you give them autonomy, they will suddenly become the good person. They will suddenly have no intention at all to escalate the war. And because they're traumatized and whatsoever, right? If that case is true and that characterization is true on their side of the house, then it means there will be no separatist movement at all on their side of the house. Because the question is, why suddenly, just because you give them power, they will suddenly cooperate, right? I think this inconsistent characterization sounds nice, honestly, from their third affirmative, but it backfire the attempt of first and second speaker to build their whole stance. If they question mutual exclusivity, it's on their side, because this separatist group, if they have good intention in the first place, they would have already cooperated without the government giving them autonomy. That's weird because it hasn't happened anyway, right? So it means that even if you give them autonomy, it's not a guarantee, and it's never something that they could assume that would happen immediately on their side. What does it leads towards the first question in my speech, right? So firstly, what does giving status means? Firstly, that you are giving them special status that is not intervenable, meaning the parallel example would be Yogyakarta, like electing the Sultan as regional leader, which is why it's a double-edged sword, right? Because at the same time, you want to make sure they don't separate even further, but at the same time, it's entirely impossible to check and balance them, for example, because the leader, even though they make discriminative policy like this, allowing Chinese ethnic to own land because the central government cannot intervene, it, for example, is still happening because there's no check and balance and whatsoever. I think that giving autonomy means that you are going to give the authority for them to govern that area and sending signals to them and validating their separatist motive, for example, right? It validates the anger and validates the hatred that exists inside of movement that they have all this time, which is why it's going to be even more aggressive, for example, because now they have a funnel to channel their anger because they have the authority now, and they will have the access to major resources like nature resources, for example, which is why it can contribute towards the whole movement progressivity, right? Because now they can have all the resources being utilized for separatist movement, for example, when it might be the water or even nature resources that are meant for the livelihood of the people or the civilization that exists in that particular area, and the place that they govern will become very anarchic and will become non-intervenable, right? There's three ways in terms of this context. This is exactly what Adin proves to you. I think that Adin already stated that the team that could win this debate is the one who could provide the most approximate benefit for everybody, that could enjoy by every single individual in that area. But I think the validation of separatist movement that already proven by us will only become exclusive only for the movement itself, because the benefit will only contributing towards the empowerment of the internal movement, not for the greater group of Africa, for example, right? Into funding more brutal conflicts, the integrity, because they want to possess their anger and hatred towards other community. Which is why on our side, we do not want to give up the structural reforms and progression like power sharing agreements or even affirmative action, and also the example given by my second speaker, like the establishment of a national body to supervise human rights, for example, right? Then on their side, we prove autonomy will only result into exclusive benefit for only specific groups, especially the majoritarian who govern that particular area that granted the autonomy. Which is why the win goes to us in this first clash, because we told you that affirmative case is contingent in terms of whether they will cooperate or not, right? This is what we pointed out in the first place, because the motion only gives them the fiat to create regional powers, But what they prove is only, firstly, why regional power should be given to them because there's so much trauma response because the government is being corrupted, for example. Sure, that is the justification, but they did not prove why in that process of giving the autonomy, cooperation with that group will exist. Because I think this is sort of like the backlash in the attempt of them trying to say that, this group will still be violent on our side of the house. It means that if it will still be like existing on their side of the house, they will still be violent anyway, because that is the nature of the movement that cannot be solved simply by giving them autonomy, right? It means that validating them doesn't help at all. Aside from that, I think that this debate is also not about solving conflict, tension, and peace. I don't know why they take such a huge burden in the first place, because if that is true, then I think this tension wouldn't even exist at all. We are very charitable to argue that the one who could win the debate is not to, like utopia argument like solving conflicts and achieve peace, for example, because that is basically impossible. We think that the team that could win this debate is the one who could minimize the harm from happening, like the cost and benefit. We would argue that granting autonomy for separatist movement will only create more conflict. Therefore, the cost is not worth it for the little benefit that they're able to prove to you. Why our counterfactual is better? Because we say that Africa is already very fragmented and already has a lot of ethnic tension in the first place. If you allow separatist group that is from the majoritarian to gain the regional government authority, you will trade off the massive progression of sovereignty and also the progress of the territorial integrity on our side of the house that has already been advocating for lots of years and also for a very, very long time, right? Because on our side, sure, they might still exist, the corrupted government, for example, but they are not granted political power to those groups that are very violent, meaning that we do not accept any kind of like violent action based on ethnics and identity groups, for example. So if the Tigray People's Liberation Front have engaged in armed resistance, we oppose and we give them the signal that this is not a justified way for you to ask for peace, for example. And this is what we are able to prove why it minimizes the harm from happening. Very proud to stand in opposition. Do not affirm.
Thank you. Next reply.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Wait. I will start my reply in 3, 2, and 1. Africa is a very diverse continent that have regional minority and majority since the very get-go. Means that in any proposal that affirmative and negative wants to bring is it always based on majoritarian basis. But the question is very simple. Do we want to give this majoritarian basis the most extreme way possible to, the outcome will be oppressive to this minority group that's spread out along this regional level, or we want to fix this governmental to be more moderate since the very get-go? Several evaluations to kick the entire case of affirmative in this debate. First, I think affirmative cases are contingent to do this country to this regional government wants to co-op or not. But let's read the motion carefully. That Africa country should grant separatist group regional government status. The fiat of this motion is just to this regulation of passing the regional government is passed by the Parliament of Africa country, not that this regional group want to cooperate in the very first place. So I think with their very dismissive case, they cannot win this debate. But second evaluation then, judges. Jason and Jose might be right that our counter mechanism can always be done in their side of the house, in their very base case scenario. But hear me, judges. In a proposal motion, exclusivity of benefit is not always equal to be certain and fulfilling and good benefit since the very get-go. The benefit have to be certain and fulfilling the most utilitarian metrics in this debate, because we are not debating as African country. They fail to do it, they lose this debate. But thirdly then, Jose and Ryan's speech are contradicting with each other. Ryan said that these people have no authorities and no expertise to govern themselves. But Jose said that they have, because all the cases are sometimes done by their case. But two classes in this debate. First, there is justified. Second, which give more benefit. First, this kind of thing is justified. Affirmative say that, this is something that justified to do if it is a form of oppression that's happening by the majoritarian people in the country and the government. How you evaluate this case to our case, judges? First, we already proved to you that it's exactly the oppression of majoritarian basis. So this is why, at the end of the day, this is something that is inherently bad. Because if you grant them this minority, a majoritarian status, by giving them regional separate power, this will validate their irrational decision that they have since the very get-go. Because we are the team who explain to you the process on how this anger, this actually looks like in the status quo, we win in this debate. But secondly then, even if in the very best case scenario in affirmative, they say that, this is part of the bargaining position to this kind of via regional status. We already say that even if the very basic scenario of opposition, this is true of bargaining position, this bargaining is bad because these bargaining positions validate themselves to oppress even more minority within the region and more vulnerable and more important in this debate. But tell them, but even if you didn't buy the judges, we prove to you and show you that this is simply incorrect for government to actually dump this responsibility to the local government. So the way is very simple. First, in urgency, we win, but second, in vulnerability of actor, we win. But let's move on to the debate about technicalities. This is all the benefit that want to go up by affirmative. They say that this will be good because it will have more bargaining position to these people, that nation to make an equilibrium to the nation, and people have to study each other. How you weigh these judges? First, I don't see any reason to why the separatist movement want to recalculate with government in their side of the house. It's because the government grant their wish, for example. Because I think the idea of this separatist movement is unstructured and separatist and whatsoever. So exactly, I think this is a scale of analysis that's coming from affirmative side of the house. But second reason then, this is why the idea of strong government power that moderate two different separate things are important and exclusive in of the house. Because what Ilham said earlier, judges notice when you folded their emotion, this will be backlashing to the central government themselves because the separatist movement will be more justified to do such a thing because they will win over the democratic government in the very get-go. But thirdly then, this is why also our benefit is exclusive. Because in order to you to grant this evaluation, you have to address the likelihood first, and the purpose of it is the responsibility are still handled by the central government. The people is two things. First, approximate benefit, the burden of this motion, by the way, because the outcome that even if you buy that outcome, judges have the benefit just for the majoritarian basis, the separatist movement. But secondly, that likelihood, because I think all the benefit might be appealing and life-changing for every African, but that is uncertain for proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Afreply.
Right. The negative team really wants everything and would most likely achieve nothing. They want the government to stand against separatists by diplomacy while at the same time also continuing the military operation. This is mutually exclusive because if you bomb them senseless, then they are unlikely to be willing to come into the negotiating table in the first place. They also want reform while defeating the separatists, but these separatist movements are the accountability mechanism to force the state to reform. Violence is the language of the powerless, and if you keep stomping the violence, then you are stomping the necessity to give power to the powerless. This debate has basically revolved around the question of which side can resolve the conflict better, right? With the government team, we argue that the resolution will be better off insofar as you are negotiate, while the opposition wanted to create some minimal reforms, which is symmetrical, and continuing the war instead. One, Ryan has already established how African military is going to have a hard time to fight decentralized separatist and terrorist group due to four structural reasons, there's corruption and all of that. And I extended even further with these small cells that are going to be very difficult to be controlled to begin with. But sure, whatever. Even if the central government may win, the question is how long it would take them to win. They are having small cells. They're already spreading the idea. They got the legitimacy by surviving so long. The comparative is that their case rests on the assumption that these separatists does not have the resources. Maybe, maybe not. All we know is that Boko Haram still exists. These separatist organizations still exist. And against all odds, against their supposed limited resources, the reality is they still survive for decades and probably is going to survive even longer. This is important because the longer it takes to stop the war, it is not just the cost of time, it is also at the cost of lives of the people. The more of your army, for example, the more civilians are going to be dead by the time, the longer you take into stopping the war in and of itself. Instead, we are providing the alternative on how to defeat them by bringing them to negotiation and by collaborating and cooperating with them, because at the very least, it would split the organization, which would make it much weaker, as Jose already told you. Furthermore, Jose already frames that if you got the autonomy and still fight, then you would lose the credibility from your own people, because exactly as no one wanted the war to continue, if you continue the warmongering despite the negotiation, despite the autonomy, then you have no more credibility insofar as you are continuing to perpetuate violence. The comparative on our side is that insofar as this organization is going to be competent, which was already expanded, they are most likely going to be rational. And if the characterization of the opposition team is true, that they are most likely unable to win, then they are most likely able to negotiate and end the war at the first possible chance that they are able to get the government into negotiating table. This flips their one-liner assumption of their underlying case that the separatist movement is inherently violent without any further explanation. Furthermore, by stopping the war permanently, you are able to save everyone. Because remember, if the framing of the opposition team is really true and the separatist group is really that majoritarian and anti-minority, they would bomb the minority in your world instead of being curbed under our world. Furthermore, the management of resources are going to be better off, because I already characterized that the access is going to be better off, and Jose already expanded on it. It's called nuance and not backlashing. So hitting your head to the wall over and over again will not stop the war. Bringing them into the negotiation table will, and for the sake of humanity, proud to propose.
Thank you. Since I'm judging alone,